Black CEO Triplet denied first-class meal, but her power move after landing shook the airline. The cabin lights had that hush-before-rain warmth when the cart finally clicked into first class, silver drawers sliding like secrets. Outside the windows, dusk painted the clouds the color of bruised peaches as Flight 713 crossed a continent on a Tuesday that felt like a verdict. Row 2 watched with the hunger of people who had paid to be untouchable. Row 1, Seat A, watched like a scientist. In 1A sat Mariah Omondi, one of the famous Omondi triplets, 3 identical faces on the cover of Forbes, 3 minds that had built a clean energy empire from a basement lab and bruised knuckles. She had the kind of stillness that unsettled men who believed noise proved power. Braided hair pulled into a crown knot, dark skin catching the lamp's gold, a charcoal suit pressed into sharp lines, a book open on her lap titled Supply Chains and Souls. When the flight attendant reached her, the rhythm broke. He glanced at her boarding pass, then at her face, then at the remaining plates like a gambler counting chips. "We're out of the sea bass," he announced, neutral as a form letter. "We have a cold hummus plate." His tone suggested apology to the air, not to her. "That's impossible," said the man in 1C without lowering his news app. "I pre-ordered 2 hours ago." "Of course, sir," the attendant replied, smile unfurling as if it had been waiting just for him. He placed the last covered entree, steam fogging the dome, on 1C's tray, and turned back to Mariah with the look of someone bracing for a difficult customer he could later complain about. "As I said, ma'am, hummus, or I can see if Coach has extra snack boxes." In the space of a heartbeat, the aisle became a theater and the passengers became a jury. A woman in row 2 stirred, her necklace chiming faintly like a conscience. The couple in 1D and 1F exchanged glances salted with curiosity. The second attendant lingered by the galley curtain, reading the air. Mariah closed her book, a finger marking the page. Her voice was the kind that had chaired acquisitions and burial services, low, steady, almost kind. "I also pre-ordered," she said, and held up the confirmation on her phone as if it were a passport at a border. The attendant's smile held. His eyes did not. "Sometimes the system misses things," he said. "Sometimes people miss people," she replied, not moving. A half-second beat, soft as a dropped feather, and then the smallest ripple, eyes from row 3, row 4, tugged by gravity toward the spectacle of a black woman in a seat designed to make denial feel unthinkable. The attendant leaned in, conspiratorial. "It's just a meal." The man in 1C chuckled. "Some folks are always hungry for something else." The chuckle slid a film over the moment, the kind that often coats bias with plausible deniability. Mariah watched that film try to harden, the way a story about who belonged up here tried to write itself over her every time she flew. Her phone vibrated, an encrypted message from her sisters, twin pulses in her pocket heartbeat. She didn't look. She could read them without eyes. Zuri would be telling a story about a turbine blade at the new plant singing when the wind was right. Amma would be sending a photo of their mother's garden lit like a runway at blue hour. The attendant cleared his throat. "Will the hummus be fine?" It was said the way people ask if a smaller life will be fine for you. Outside, the engines held them aloft on thrust and math. Inside, a different engine hummed, the one that had learned over 38 years how to turn insult into voltage without burning the house down. "Please heat the vegetarian option to the same standard you heat the entrees," Mariah said. "And bring me the documentation on how pre-orders are allocated when there's a shortage." His smile thinned. "We don't, you do," she said, and it wasn't a threat. It was a memory. This airline had a policy. She had read it. He looked toward the galley for backup, found only stainless steel reflecting his surprise. The second attendant stepped forward. "I'll grab the manual," she said, tone clean as a new runway. For a blink, it seemed the moment would resolve into polite professionalism. Then a voice from row 2, amused, provoked by its own echo chamber. "Maybe she's used to special treatment." Laughter like broken ice tinkled from a pair of earbuds. The second attendant's mouth tightened. The first one's eyes flicked to security calculus. Mariah's stare did not sharpen. It clarified. She lifted her gaze to the ceiling tiles and recited in her head a list of names, grandmothers, aunties, mentors, the way some people flip worry beads. When she looked back down, the temperature in her eyes matched the cabin, precisely controlled. "Do your jobs," she said evenly. "And do them for everyone." The curtain swished. The cart squeaked away. The cabin exhaled a tiny, guilty breath. The story could have ended as so many do, an inconvenience filed as attitude in an incident log. But at 32,000 feet with a continent sleeping underneath, the plane carried something combustible, history packed into the veins of a woman who had learned to be both fuse and extinguisher, and an industry that still sometimes confused customer service with customer sorting. The Omandi triplets were born in a city that cracked ice into its sidewalks 6 months a year and laughed at umbrellas the other 6. Their mother, a night shift nurse who wrote her grocery lists on the backs of discharge instructions, and their father, a math teacher who could turn the grocery list into a lesson on optimization, raised them on thrift and ferocious love. The girls learned early that being identical did not mean being the same. Mariah collected silence and turned it into strategy. Zuri collected questions and turned them into experiments. Amma collected people and turned them into movements. Their church aunties called them Blessing 1, Blessing 2, Blessing 3, then forgot which was which, and decided God could sort that out later. At home, the girls learned an equation as simple and hard as gravity. If the door is closed, learn the hinge. If the hinge is welded, make another door. If the house is on fire, call the neighbors and build a neighborhood that doesn't burn so easily. That math would one day run wind farms. Before that, it would run bake sales and robotics teams and a little backyard business mending broken lawnmowers for men who pretended they didn't need help. Racism was not a chapter in a textbook, but the way a sales clerk spoke to their mother in a voice wrapped in bubble wrap. It was the look a police officer gave 3 teenagers walking home with solder burns on their fingers and parts of a drone in their backpacks. It was the scholarship interview where the committee chair asked if they had any real-world leaders they admired besides the predictable names. He suggested Steve Jobs as if he had discovered oxygen, and then blinked when Amma said, "Claudette Colvin," because some people sat down so I could stand up. When the triplets launched Omandi Systems, they started with second-hand equipment and first-rate stubbornness. They soldered at a second-hand table in a rented basement that smelled like damp cardboard and belief. Their first patent, an adaptive blade geometry that coaxed power from stingy wind, was rejected twice, then accepted once they redrafted the drawings into a language gatekeepers liked to read. Venture capitalists learned to recognize their pitch deck by its clean fonts and its refusal to apologize for ambition. Some investors did the exotic wildlife look when they entered the room. 3 black women, 1 company, 1 mind, braided 3 ways. Those investors were not invited back. The ones who stayed learned what their high school had learned, what their neighborhood had learned. The triplets were not a novelty. They were an inevitability. Within 10 years, Omandi Systems powered towns that had been forgotten by grids and remembered by wind. They trained welders in counties that had lost their mills, built apprenticeships for teenagers who could rebuild engines with their eyes closed and needed someone to open a different kind of door. Fortune ran a cover. The 3 who turned air into light. The profile included 1 photograph that became a tattoo on 24 young engineers' arms. The sisters standing shoulder to shoulder in hard hats, under a turbine that looked like a white star on a blue noon. Success did not turn racism into a ghost. It taught it new clothes. Mariah learned the lingo of dismissal recited in velvet. Sharp, difficult, intimidating. She learned the rituals of performance. Smile enough to grease the skids. Never smile so much you get mistaken for soft. She kept the company's HR system as sharp as their blades, not because she liked policy, but because she liked dignity. She insisted on a corporate travel policy with carve-outs for crew and service staff on partner airlines, a little clause nobody read. Omandi Systems reserved the right to request crew rosters after any documented customer service incident in the interest of training and equity. She had used that clause twice. Once for a gate agent who treated a janitor like luggage. Once for a pilot who let a slur slide because he didn't want to start something. Firing an entire crew was not a lever she had ever pulled, not even metaphorically. She believed in second chances. She believed in context. She believed in systems that break people often enough that you can't fix it one person at a time. But she also believed in thresholds. What's the threshold? Amma once asked over coffee. When the story becomes a policy, Mariah said. When a bias isn't a glitch, but the code. On Flight 713, the code wrote itself in real time across the body language of a man with a cart. A man with a chuckle and an audience that knew the script and watched anyway. Mariah's sisters pinged her again on the phone she wasn't reading. She could feel their voices, Zuri's teasing, "Bet you're rewriting a manual up there," and Amma's sparking anger. "Tell me who I should call." Mariah smiled, the kind you aim inward. Not yet, she thought. But maybe. The second attendant returned with a binder that had survived coffee spills and middle managers. She placed it gently on Mariah's tray as if it were a sacred text. "Allocation of pre-ordered meals," she said, tapping a page. "In the event of shortage, priority is pre-ordered passengers by timestamp, then status tier, then seat location, then, if all else equal, crew discretion." Her finger stilled over the line like a gavel. The first attendant materialized with the hummus, now warmed, garnished with an apologetic wedge of lemon and 2 slices of bread toasted as if heat could fix hierarchy. "As I explained," he said to the binder instead of the woman, "we were out." The binder explained otherwise. Mariah lifted her gaze to the second attendant. "Thank you," she said. To the first, "What timestamp did passenger 1C place his pre-order?" He blinked. Let me ask the purser." "You are the purser," the second attendant said softly. The chuckle from 1C returned, thinner now. "This is getting ridiculous," he said. "It's dinner on a plane, not the Supreme Court." "If only planes were immune to precedent," Mariah murmured, but not to him. The second attendant set down a cup of tea. "On me," she said quietly. "No, on the airline," Mariah corrected, not unkindly. "Do not pay for policy." The purser retreated to the galley, returned with a small printout like a confession. Pre-order timestamps 1A, 12:04 p.m., 1C, 12:37 p.m. He held it a moment too long, as if his fingers could smudge time. Mariah read it, then folded it, then placed it beside her book. "You made a choice," she said. "You can make another." He opened his mouth to invoke supply chain or staff shortage or the moon's phase, but the excuses tripped over the one thing that did not move. The numbers. Somewhere behind row 10, a baby cried, then stopped when someone with kindness picked it up. Somewhere in the economy cabin, a college student returned to a textbook open to an exam he would pass and then forget. The plane was a temporary city, and this was its courthouse moment. The purser inhaled to speak, and a new voice stepped into the aisle's acoustics. "Is there a problem?" The voice came from a tall man in a navy suit slipping out of 2D with the ennui of people who assume their presence is a solution. The purser brightened, grateful for any wind. "Just a misunderstanding." The man glanced at Mariah, processed a face he might have seen on a magazine cover if his algorithm had been wider. "Sometimes we make too much of small things," he told her, in the tone people use to file complaints under emotional. "Sometimes we make too little," she said. He pressed his lips into a line that read, "uppity," a word your mouth shouldn't know how to make and yet does because history writes it on your tongue before you're born. The second attendant shifted her weight like a witness deciding whether to testify. "Captain requests final service secured for descent in 20. Came a call from the interphone. The purser seized it like a parachute. "We have to move on," he declared. "We're on a schedule." "So is justice," Mariah said, and the word did what words do when they arrive in a cabin with recycled air. It changed the oxygen a little. Service continued in a jittery rhythm. In coach, snack boxes disappeared for people who hadn't been offered one in a year. In first, silence did the talking. Mariah ate the heated hummus like it was a sacrament of restraint. When the purser returned with dessert, he set the tray down too hard, and a chocolate tart skidded half an inch like a small insult trying to become a big one. "Careful," she said. and he smiled like he might drop the sky on purpose. The seatbelt sign chimed. The cabin obeyed. The captain's voice popped overhead, Midwestern and mild. "Folks, we're starting our descent into Boston. Weather's clear. We'll be on the ground in about 35 minutes. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for arrival." The purser nodded to himself, restored by authority in the rafters. The second attendant passed, eyes meeting Mariah's for the length of a breath. There are glances that say, "I see you," and glances that say, "I might risk something." This was both. The wheels thumped down into their housings. The flaps whispered secrets. The city's grid rose to meet them. The harbor a sheet of hammered metal, the runways stitching into view. Mariah opened her book. She didn't read. She wrote a plan in the margins with a golf pencil that had seen other battles. 1. Document timestamp. 2. Request crew roster. 3. Call Airline's VP of Ops. She had his number. They had built a turbine together at a charity event and swapped business cards like talismans. 4. Insist on training with metrics that cannot be gamed by charm. 5. Note passengers' comments while memory was still hot. 6. Breathe. Then she added a 7th line her sisters would both approve and warn her about. 7. Pull the clause. Wheels kissed asphalt with the confident hush of a pilot who likes her job. The plane decelerated, rolled, turned, and stopped at gate B-17 with a little lurch that made people remember gravity. Phones reanimated. Seatbelts snapped. Overhead bins groaned like old trees. The captain's voice, cheerful. "Welcome to Boston." The purser stood tall in the galley, helmeting his smile. He would be off this plane and into his next life in 10 minutes. He did not know yet that his next life would be very different. The door cracked. The jet bridge mated with the fuselage with that soft shudder that feels like arrival and compromise. "Ladies and gentlemen," the purser sang, "please remain seated until we resolve an incident," Mariah said, rising. The aisle obeyed the old physics of social gravity. People sat. Seats creaked. The purser's smile dimmed a watt. "Ma'am, if you have feedback—" "Justice has a schedule," she repeated, and the second attendant covered her mouth to turn a laugh into a cough. Mariah stepped into the galley, which is to say she stepped into the frame where decisions are usually made away from witnesses. "I need the crew roster," she said. "Per Omandi Systems Partner Clause, Section 12.3, we reserve the right to review crew rosters following documented incidents of bias affecting service delivery." The purser blinked too long, flustered by the correct citation and the way she wore it. "I'm not authorized." "I am," said a voice behind her. The gate manager had arrived, drawn by the scent of a problem that might trend. She had the gait of someone who had broken up fights between pilots and weather, the look of someone who had learned to listen 2 octaves lower than most people speak. "I'm Elise," she said to Mariah. "Let's step into the jet bridge." "We'll do this here," Mariah said calmly. "Where it happened." The purser shifted, feeling the floor tilt under him though the plane was still. Elise weighed this and nodded. "Okay, what's the complaint?" "It's not a complaint," Mariah said. "It's a pattern. Meal pre-orders were reallocated against timestamp and in favor of a male passenger over a black woman. Documentation confirms the mismatch." Tone escalated to dismissiveness. Passenger in 2D joined to minimize my response. Passenger in 1C made a remark implying I seek special treatment and laughed in support of the purser's decision. The second attendant adhered to policy and should be commended. Elise glanced at the second attendant, who stood very still, learning the shape of gratitude. The purser opened his mouth. "I didn't—" "You did," Mariah said. "And it wasn't the first time, I'd wager." "She's making this about race," 1C interjected from his seat, loudly enough for the cabin to hear. "It was dinner." "It is always dinner," Mariah said, turning, voice carrying with surgical precision. "It is always a store, a checkout line, a boardroom, a seat on an airplane, and then one day people like me own the factory that makes the cutlery, and we remember." Silence expanded like a parachute. Elise cleared her throat. Miss Omandi, if you'd like to file a formal—" "I'd like to execute the partner clause," Mariah said. She handed over a printed copy, the golf pencil note now inked by resolve. Elise read. Her eyebrows twitched upward at the legal elegance, the way a partnership letter could become a blade. This allows your company to request that we remove specific crew from future Omandi Systems flights for cause, Elise summarized. It allows us to request retraining or removal, Mariah corrected. But today I'm invoking the portion that allows us to suspend service with any crew whose documented behavior ridicules or diminishes our passengers based on protected characteristics. The purser laughed. A brittle sound people make when they realize the rules are real. You can't fire an airline crew, he scoffed. You don't sign our checks. No, Mariah said softly. But I signed the checks for 12,000 annual corporate segments and a mid-seven-figure co-branded energy initiative that puts your logo on. Turbines from Amarillo to Akron. And I sign a partnership rider that says any crew we document as discriminatory will not staff any route we pay for or board. The man in 1C found a new shape in his jaw. Caution. That's not the same as firing, he tried, weak as decaf. Language matters, Mariah agreed. Let me be precise. I am requesting immediate removal of this entire first-class crew from Omandi Systems manifests until they undergo third-party anti-bias training with measurable outcomes, and a review of the purser's conduct for possible reassignment. If your airline declines, Omandi Systems will reallocate our travel to carriers with enforceable equity guarantees. Elise stared at the paper, then at the people, then at the future that had walked onto her jet bridge uninvited and sat down. She turned to the purser, her voice a level line. Please gather your team on the jet bridge, he sputtered. You're not. Now, she said, the steel in her job finally visible. The second attendant moved first, head high. The third, who had avoided the whole section like a superstition, followed with eyes like a preschooler caught drawing on walls. The purser stood last, eyes a blown fuse. Elise addressed them with the attention people reserve for pivots. Effective immediately, you are removed from Omandi Systems service under the partner rider. You will not crew any segment booked under that account until you complete the training listed here. This is not termination from the airline, but it is an operational removal that impacts your schedule and bid for the next cycle. HR will follow up. The second attendant swallowed, eyes shining with a relief she didn't dare show. The purser started to speak, then stopped. He looked at Mariah like a person looks at a mountain that didn't move when he asked nicely. You can't humiliate us like this, he said. And the word us slid across the floor like oil. Humiliation is what you did when you treated policy as optional depending on who was in the seat, Mariah said. Accountability is public because harm was public. The cabin had become a classroom without desks. Passengers watched a thing few of them had seen, consequence aligned to power that didn't look like theirs. From row 8, someone began to clap, not a cheer but a recognition. It spread, awkward at first, then steady. Elise didn't stop it. She looked at the crew. You're released, she said. They filed off through the forward door into a future that would feel narrower for a while. Mariah turned to Elise, handed her a card. My team will follow up with metrics. Thank you for doing your job in front of witnesses. Thank you for bringing paperwork, Elise said, a quick, skewed smile that hid a wince. Paperwork saves lives, and sometimes careers. And sometimes ends them, Mariah said, if they insist on being the wrong kind of story. By the time she reached the car service line, Mariah's phone trembled with the kind of notifications that mean you've either been canceled or canonized. Amma had texted, saw a thread. You okay? Need a dragon or a lawyer? Zuri. Metrics request incoming. Also, proud of you, but remember adrenaline tax. Hydrate. Their mother. A voice note humming a hymn too old for English translations. Mariah sent a single reply to all three. A photo of the binder page and the roster with the names redacted. Caption, policy performance. In the back seat of the car, Boston smeared by in salt-streaked streaks. Her driver, a woman with eyes that had both seen and survived, glanced at her in the mirror. You that lady? She asked gently. Today, Mariah said. Tomorrow, I'd like to be a nap. They both laughed, brief and human. At the hotel, she went straight to the ballroom where 200 community college students waited to hear how to turn wind into wages. She told them a story about a turbine blade that sang in a good breeze and about a contract writer that could change a corporation from the inside. She did not tell them about dinner. She told them about doors. Questions poured like afternoon rain. How do you find mentors? How do you negotiate your first offer? How do you stay when you're the only one in the room who looks like you? She answered with the quiet accuracy of someone who had bled for clean sentences. You don't have to win every room, she said. You have to change the rooms you can reach. On the flight home 2 days later, same route, different crew, the captain greeted her by name in the doorway, not obsequious, just precise. The purser, a woman with laugh lines that meant something, crouched by 1A to explain how pre-orders were double-checked by timestamp now and read aloud the policy to any passenger who claimed special treatment without proof. We're using your incident in training, she said, and the word your did not taste like ownership. It tasted like responsibility shared. Mariah nodded. Did the prior crew complete the program? She asked. 2 are already done, the purser said. 1 asked to switch to cargo. There's work that fits us better, Mariah said. For everyone. In the air, she finally answered press inquiries with a statement that would go viral because it refused to be spicy. Discrimination hides in small things until small things become systems. We don't punish to punish. We correct to protect. We will continue to leverage our contracts to ensure service partners treat every passenger with policy and dignity. The comments did what comments do. Some breathed relief, some breathed fire, some coughed smoke. But in crew rooms and manager meetings and union halls, the conversation moved to a different altitude. Not whether bias existed, but how to write it out of the code. The second attendant from Flight 713 sent a postcard with a picture of a lighthouse and 3 words that made Mariah cry in the hotel room where no one could see. You saved me. Saved was too big a word. Mariah placed it beside the others she didn't deserve yet. Leader, visionary, icon, and went back to work making sure her company's planes carried the right words in their contracts. Measure, report, retrain, remove, restore. Weeks later, at Sunday dinner, the triplets sat around their mother's table with bowls that steamed and laughter that knows where all the bones are buried. Amma retold the story with a preacher's cadence. Zuri interrupted to adjust the torque values on the moral. Their mother listened, then reached across, took Mariah's hand. When you were little, she said, you wanted every slice the same size. You cried if I cut one bigger for a guest. I told you later you were right, that fairness is not stinginess. Today you cut the pie again. It was just a meal, Mariah said, letting herself be small for a moment. It is never just a meal, her mother replied, and wiped a smudge of chocolate from Mariah's cheek like she had when they were 8 and hungry for all the wrong things. After dessert, the triplets walked outside. Wind came in off the river like a soft engine. In the distance, one of their turbines turned, star-white against a sky that had learned to hold them. Amma slipped her arm through Mariah's. You know you didn't fire anyone, she teased. The internet thinks you fired an airline. I corrected a vendor, Mariah said. And I fed a story to a system that eats stories for breakfast. Zuri tilted her head at the blade swinging slow, rhythmic arcs. Do you ever think about how power looks boring when it's doing its job? She asked. Yes, Mariah said. And that's the point. The day fairness becomes boring, we've won. They told her it was just dinner. It never is. It is the tiny hinge where an old door swings, the clause that turns a story into policy, the moment a smile becomes a measure. Tonight, power looked like paperwork and a steady voice in a narrow aisle, and an entire crew learned that dignity is not optional when the cabin lights are warm and everyone is watching. If this story made you think about the small things that shape who gets served and who gets sorted, share it. Ask your workplace what clauses, literal and moral, protect people when the cart rolls by. And the next time someone says it's just a meal, ask them gently, or is it the recipe for the world we're building?